Monday, and well, the Ducati is red. What a surprise that is for another MotoGP launch. Of course, we have the Factory Ducati launch today, and Marc Marquez, Pecco Bagnaia in full colours. Not really a surprise. The delivery hasn't changed that much. There's a few minor tweaks with sponsors, but I suppose the big thing is here, the talking point. We get to see them both together in the same colours as the first time in 2025, and it looks like it's going to be a, how can I say, the relationship? Well, a challenge, I imagine. Joining me as ever, Jordan Morland, is Lewis Duncan and Pete McLaren. Lewis, what was your take on the Ducati launch? You know, the bike's still the same colour, the sponsors are pretty much all the same, just a new rider, and yeah, a lot more questions about the relationship, I think, came from that after the launch that we just seen.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very fairly uninteresting launch up to the point that we saw the bikes really typical kind of sponsor. Is it? This is the point of these launches, really, is they are for the sponsors. So if you're expecting big shows and stuff like that, then you're kind of looking in the wrong place. Like you say, the key thing is that we've seen now finally Marc Marquez in full factory Ducati colours for the very first time. Of course, at that Barcelona test, he was in, factory red colour, but not true factory Ducati colours and not in any sponsorship. So we've gotten our first answers as to what's going to happen with the Red Bull thing. We know that relationship was ending. We've seen that the sponsorship on his helmet's been replaced with Estrella Galicia. He's got Monster Energy branded on his leathers and on his bikes, but as far as we're aware, he's not a Monster Energy athlete, and that won't change anytime soon. So, some clues there answered. Everything was quite cordial, wasn't it? Pecco was and Mark and the team all spoke about unity, harmony was the word thrown around quite a lot. Clearly Ducati are doing their best to really try and push forward this whole thing that, we're working as a team here, guys. We've got the two best riders in the grid, but we're a team this, team that. It's a team game. Let's see how that unfolds because, we're all expecting tensions to flare probably quite early on. So yeah, it was all quiet on the Western Front for now, I think, is how you can describe Ducati's launch.
Yeah, well, one thing I'll say, team launches don't take place on track, do they? So, it can be all nicey now, but like once you get on track together, I imagine if something happens, it'll be, fairly exciting for us watching on. Pete, what was your take on the launch? Where does it rank up in all the great launches that you've watched before?
Yeah, as Lewis said, it's the calm before the storm, really, isn't it? And quite rightly, it's about the sponsors. Also, as Lewis said, I remember many years ago as an engineering student, we had an F1 technical director sort of shocked us all by saying the purpose of an F1 team is to generate money for its sponsors. And as you can imagine, for a group of engineering students, petrol heads, that was all a bit of you could hear the gasp of air. But I think he did it deliberately to sort of bring home that it does take a lot of sponsorship to go motor racing at the highest level. And I think today's launch, as Lewis has quite rightly pointed out, this was very much Lenovo were front and center in it. Also, there was a bit of Audi, wasn't there, as well? Mm-hmm. Some of the Madonna di Campiglio organisation, they all got their airtime, if you like, didn't they, before we actually got to see the bike. And then, when we saw the bikes, they were red, and the livery is pretty much the same, isn't it? So, it's going to be quite difficult to tell them apart, I think, isn't it, this year, the bikes? You were talking about the change, the Red Bull going from Marquez's helmet means that it's lost a bit of colour there, hasn't it? The numbers don't look too clear to see, let's say, on the screen anyway. Let's see. Sometimes these the liveries look different in real life. So let's see how they are out of the studio, shall we say. But yeah, all business as usual at the moment. Lots of talk, as you say, about harmony, teamwork. One thing we didn't hear were the words Jorge Martin or Pramac, were there? There was no mention, of course, of the reigning, shall we say, champions with Ducati, no longer with Ducati for this year. But yes, I suppose quite naturally there was no mention of those guys at all for today's launch. It's all about this team. And let's be honest, for good reason. It's going to be a major upset if one of these guys doesn't win the World Championship, isn't it? But as actually you were saying before we came on air, Jordan, when was the last, and Lewis actually, when was the last time that two Ducati riders were fighting for the championship right the way to the end? We've never seen it, have we? So it's going to be a new situation for them to manage if they can take this dream team, as we keep hearing, these two guys with eight MotoGP titles between them. Can they back both of them in this title fight as the season goes on? Because we're seeing inevitably they're the favourites. I mean, as I say, I think it'd be a shock if these guys are not are not there fighting each other for the title.
Yeah, I think it would be probably the shock of the year if a Ducati rider or factory Ducati rider doesn't win the title. I mean, that would be the biggest shock to me anyway, and I imagine many fans out there. I found it strange watching it. I don't know what it is. Like, seeing Marc Marquez in full factory colours, even though we've seen him in different colours other than Repsol last year with Cassini, it was like almost like, can you believe this has happened? Like when you seen him in full factory colours at Honda, and you think of him fighting against Dovi and stuff. Everything changes so quickly in sport and life, and you look at how full circle it's came. He's standing there, a full factory Ducati rider. As Lewis mentioned previously, sponsor changes, I'll touch on those now. Marc Marquez obviously split with Red Bull because of the connections that Ducati have with Monster Energy, but he said out of respect, I believe it was during their service TV interview at Red Bull he'd done before Christmas, that out of respect for Red Bull he won't use Monster on his helmet. And that, of course, the helmet is the personal thing for the rider. That's where they get their advertising. And as you may have noticed on the pictures that we're showing, he still got it on his bike, still got it on his leathers, his team wear and his hat, but obviously nothing on the helmet, which is the thing that you identify with a rider mainly, along with the number. Interestingly, it's Estrella Galicia have the bulk of his sponsorship where the Red Bull would be. Just thought about it. We have a race in France usually where you're not allowed to advertise alcohol, so it'll look quite plain, his helmet, for that round. It'll be interesting to see what he does with it, if he changes it up or anything. But yeah, that little thing's kind of been covered, and that was a big talking point over the winter. And other than that, for me, the bike didn't change livery wise, which not I'm disappointed, but you always see something new. Literally, they're in the same team wearing everything. It just looks like it's it's carried across. And I suppose Ducati really don't want to change how they look, because maybe they find that livery they've had in 24 is the one their iconic brand has. It took 11 victories and Grand Prix wins with Pecco Bagnaia, so why would they want to change it? There's not really any time for controversies, but we did hear little things from the riders. Speaking to MotoGP.com, Lewis, Pecco Bagnaia was asked by Jack Appleyard, how will it be going up against one of the most ungentlemanly riders in Marc, and especially as they're in the same box. He gave an answer where he says, well, he can continue being the ungentleman one, I'll always be the gentleman. It kind of links back to that documentary with Davide Tardazzi saying to Pecco, you can't always be the gentleman last year in Thailand, but he's still sticking by that he'll always be the same. Interesting, that, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's very much in line with what we know about Pecco Bagnaia, really. From even last year when he was talk about are you gonna maybe ask for team orders, a bit of help from your factory stablemate, stuff like that. He said no, I've never been that rider, I'm never going to be that rider. And one has to think there are several points of that season where had you went to Ducati and instructed them to do that, it might have worked out a little bit better in his favour. And I think we've mentioned this before in the podcast that while on the one hand that approach from Pecco, that very much kind of sticking to his morals type thing is admirable. It does, you can see where Tardozzi's frustration comes into, but you don't need to be the gentleman. Ultimately this is, while it's a team sport, you have to be selfish, you have to be inherently selfish as a racer to kind of get the absolute maximum out of it. And that's where Marc Marquez is a genius, in that he is ruthless. He knows exactly what he wants, exactly what he needs to do. He knows the right buttons to press on his rivals. Pecco needs to kind of put that aside a little bit and do the same thing, because when you're going up against someone as a killer as Marquez, you're going to lose if that's your approach. You can be... And Pecco did lose last year, and that was his approach. He won 11 Grand Prix last year, but he still came out second best when there was points where maybe he could have just turn things up a little bit. He could have been a bit more, could have gotten in Jorge Martin's head a little bit more. He could have pushed a few buttons. At the end of the day, you're not really going to win any more fans by being the kind of the angelic world champion. People's favourites in all sports are the people that are bastards, really. Look at Marc, look at Rossy, look at other sports over the years. Those ruthless people. That's people who win legions and legions of fans, and those are the guys that prove to be the most successful multiple title winners. So yeah, I thought it was telling that Pecco was trying to kind of be himself still, but I think that he will lose if that is the approach that he has.
Yeah, I was surprised by it, to be honest. Pete, what do you make of the comments? Because imagine you're Marc Marquez sitting across and you hear that, you're like, well, I'm just gonna keep doing what I always do, sort of thing. Is that sort of a first sort of not all sign of weakness from Bagnaia, but it's almost like you're kind of giving Marquez the ammunition straight away, aren't you, to take advantage?
Well, I just wondered if Mark's thinking, is this the same guy that collided with me in Portimao and then rubbed his front wheel on my shoulder in Jerez? And now I'm getting called the one who's ungentlemanly.
That's it.
So, so Pecco's got, it's good that he's got this perception, but he's also shown that he's willing to get his elbows out with Mark, isn't he? And actually, it was Mark last year who was pretty careful when he's racing with Pecco, I thought. And if there's one thing, okay, obviously Mark has got this reputation, but actually when it comes to teammates, he's always had that eye on the getting the team behind you and the group behind you. He knows how divisive sort of problems within a team can be, and so he has usually given his teammates a bit more room. And certainly that I think I don't know. I can see, I understand that Mark has this reputation, but I do also think that really we saw that Pecco was the one who wasn't afraid to roll up his sleeves and and push the limits with Mark last year. So really the same question could also go to Mark of how will you react if Pecco rubs his front wheel on your shoulder this year. I think it set it up nicely, because they're both, at the end of the day, they're both they're multiple champions, which, as Marquez has said in the past, they're the only multiple champions on the grid, of course, at the moment, aren't they? They're a different breed, a multiple champion. Some people get to the top, whether it's Formula One, MotoGP, they get to that top of the mountain, if you like, in their career. They can do it once, and then it's not the same. They don't have that desire to then battle their way up again. These are the two guys that have done that, and it was set up for a great season, a great contest between these guys on the same equipment, the factory bike. As you've said, it's going to be a major upset if they don't both fight for the championship. Do you know what? We've had major upsets before, haven't we? When Rossy joined Ducati, when Lorenzo joined Repsol Honda. So, let's not rule anything out at this stage, but certainly we are expecting these two guys to be head and shoulders above the rest. And in that situation, it's very difficult, isn't it, to keep a lid on the competition. I think looking back that Mark's attitude towards his rivals changed a bit when he battled Dovi.
I think so,
Dovi was someone who you could battle with on the racetrack, and then they'd be chatting away in the car on the way to the podium, wouldn't they? And that was a new experience for Mark, having gone through, facing Lorenzo, Rossy, those guys that you battled 100% on and off the track. And Dovi was someone who sort of changed, I think, Mark's perception a little bit in that sense. As you say, you've got the gentleman Bagnaia, to use the sort of the stereotype, and you've got Mark. I'm not sure which way it's going to go, honestly. He's saying it's all about the team as well, as you guys have pointed out, that it's team first, the team's going to win, and the phrase we kept hearing from both of them, which is always a bit more of a coincidence, isn't it, is that whoever will win will win. That seems to be the tagline at the moment, doesn't it, to avoid the questions of the competition between them. But calm before the storm, as they say.
Yeah, I like the point about Dovi, actually. I think back to that, obviously two separate teams they were in and they were battling for world titles, but yeah, it did kind of not throw Marquez a bit, because Dovi's just a nice guy, isn't he? And it's just like, well, he's separating the racing and the personal side. As soon as the helmet's off and they've had a great battle. I like that side, but I don't know if it's going to work with Pecco and Mark in the same team. It's difficult for Ducati, I think, to predict what they would like to happen and what's going to happen. It's just, there's something for me with Marquez is keeping his cards close to his chest again. He didn't really give anything away, and when he was speaking to the press, he even got asked by MotoGP.com, Lewis, that is this the biggest year of your career so far, kind of thing, and he was like, no, 2024 was, because it was the comeback. I just sense that he's really ready for this, isn't it? Because he said about keeping one eye on the title from round one straight away, and when he's coming out saying that, he hadn't said it since 2020. Really, this is a different Marquez. He's going back to the old ways, I can sense.
It's the first time we've heard Mark since he signed for the Factory Ducati team that he is actually thinking about the championship, because up to this point he's spoken about, as a team we need to get the team up front first, Pecco's going to be the number one, he's the reference guy, blah blah blah. It's the first time we've heard Marquez openly and within earshot of Pecco Bagnaia as well. Let's not forget that the expectation is to fight for the world championship from the first race, and That's interesting. I think the switch, we are very steadily starting to see that switch from Marc. You know, he's had that year on the Grassini bike. He's won races. He's back to where he was. He very nearly beat Pecco Bagnaia on an inferior Ducati, and I think this is where those kind of points between the two of them, those flashpoints last year, will get put into further kind of focus this year, because Portugal, when Pecco was struggling, you know, the GP, we now know that the GP23 that Marc was on wasn't the end of season GP3. It was essentially the start of season GP3. So it was a much older spec than that factory bike, and he almost beat him at Jerez after what happened in Portugal. And you remember after that Portugal race, Marc went to the media, said that was his fault. Pecco went to the media before Marc and said it was a racing incident. Now, it transpired as well that the two of them had quite a heated exchange in the steward's office. So, you know, there are those little things there that Marc has in his reserve, and he will be able to kind of push those buttons with Pecco, I think, because when they get on equal machinery, and if there's a practice, even just one practice session where Marc is a couple, 3 tenths ahead of Pecco, it will start it will start that reevaluation of those races last year where we're all like, oh, Pecco and Marc side by side rubbing wheels. It'll be like, oh, well, hang on a minute. If they were on the same bike, what would have happened? And that's when we're going to see the kind of the real Marc Marquez turn up, when he starts to twist those screws. You mentioned Dovi, Pete. I remember after that Austria race, where in 2019 where he got beaten again on another last lap battle, and the thing that stood out to me at the time from that was that Marc was asked about it, and he said, nobody will remember these second places when I win the World Championship. That's the kind of said, you know, even if he has a cordial relationship with Dovi, he still knew what buttons to press and still knew how to kind of diminish that achievement that Dovi's just done. That will happen again and again and again with Pecco. You know, if Marc went in and Pecco beats him, Marc will be able to go, well, yeah, you know, he's more experienced on the bike, I'm still learning it. And then when he beats him, he'll go, well, you know, I've had this potential before, but I was on an old bike. There will always be this continually evolving needle between them. The elephant in the room we have to address is the Rossy factor, because ultimately, Pecco Bagnaia does not need to say anything. If he has a problem, he'll let his pal do it. He'll let Valentino do it. And I think that will be what will help Pecco a lot this season. So he doesn't need to get involved into any he said, she said. If anything happens, Valentino will be the first one to find some, you know, press allies, let's say, and he'll let rip, and that's going to be the interesting dynamic as well.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Actually, sure, we even had it last year with Rossy speaking to, was it the French?
L'Equipe.
Yeah, Cape, yeah, and he was speaking to them about, couldn't understand why Ducati had selected Marc Marquez. I mean, don't need to say anymore. It's just like, if anything happens, even on like you say, Lewis, a practice session or a qualifying session with Marquez and Pecco, is it going to be something that Rossy is going to try and control for the media? I know people listening are probably going, oh, they brought up Rossy and Marquez again, but it is a factor. You've got the VR46 Academy's best product in the factory team. He's the most successful Ducati rider. It's no coincidence that Rossy says he wants to be more involved in MotoGP in 2025. However his calendar works with his car adventures, I imagine he'd be a lot of Grand Prix still. And this is the key, isn't it, Pete? Because will Marquez let that distract him, or will he keep doing what he does and just lets Rossy speak and doesn't really say anything? Do you think that will be key for him?
Yeah. I mean, we've seen it, haven't we, from Marquez, where he sort of bats away. He doesn't respond to the comments, really, does he? Because he was asked about the interview and the comments, that, as you mentioned there, and he just sort of laughs it off, doesn't he? He doesn't get involved. It'll be the context of them. You know, are the comments, if they come out, could Marquez almost see it as, oh, well, Rossi's worried about Bagnaia, that's why he's speaking. And in that way, he'll, you know, for Marquez, he'll actually see it as a bit of a boost. Oh, okay, this is coming out because, you know, they know that they're in trouble against me. I think it will also almost make Pecco look in a stronger position if Rossy doesn't, you know, stays out of it as long as he can. And as we know, Pecco likes to do his talking on the racetrack. So if it does come up, then I think, yeah, as you guys say, it's just going to add another dimension to it. But I think, you know, Marquez it'd be unlikely for him to respond too much. He knows that there's little to be gained. But as you say, it's all pressure. It's all about the pressure off the racetrack, the comments. I mean, Marquez always used to welcome the new teammate to Repsol Honda, didn't he, by saying at these kind of launches, well, when you're in this team, you've got to fight for the World Championship, wasn't it? He would immediately pile the pressure onto whether it was Lorenzo or Joan Mir or Paul Espargaro. He would, point out that this is the best team in MotoGP kind of thing, as it was at the time, and in terms of the results. And now you're in here, you have to fight for the championship. That would sort of be, he would start the season in that way. Now Pecco, he could do the same thing. He's choosing not to, but I think it is at least consistent enough, we say, to acknowledge that, look, I'm in the Factory Ducati team, the best team on the grid at the moment. I need to fight for the championship, and I think that's just being realistic, isn't it? I don't think anyone would believe him if he just said, well, I'm here to just win a few races and that's it. You don't join the Factory Ducati team. He could have stayed at Grossetti to do
exactly.
That. He could have had a much quieter life, couldn't he? But instead, he's going to the team where you have to fight for the championship. And we saw today in the launch. It's all about the results for Ducati. There's a lot of pressure on everybody there. It's a factory team, and they've signed Marc Marquez to fight for the championship. I think there's no doubt about that. And let's see how it goes from here. We should say the bike that we saw obviously wasn't the 2025 spec, was it?
Yeah, they even said that, didn't they?
Yeah, they were honest enough to sort of say. I think Gigi did say they've got some new parts and they coming up, even including, I think he said, a completely new fairing. So that'll be something to look out for. Aprilia did seem to show a bit, the 25 bike, didn't they? They were. That was quite refreshing to sort of see something that's sort of visually new, shall we say? But yeah, nothing to get excited about from the bike on display today, shall we say?
Yeah, I can't wait to see what Ducati bring to the test. I mean, if he says it's a new fairing, please to God, there'll be no more wings on that thing. It'll take off the next time it's down a straight. So it will. But yeah, look, there's anything to add to that last conversation we just had?
Yeah, the other thing as well, as is worth bearing in mind, is this is, of course, 10 years since 2015 this year, and we have heard Rossy recently talk about how he still thinks about that year quite a lot, and I think the final revenge for Marquez for all the noise that might be, whatever the rival, if he wins the title on that Ducati, then he's matched Rossi's Premier Class tally and a World Championship tally in general on a bike that Rossi couldn't do it on. Obviously, it's different circumstances, but that'll be the thing that will keep driving Marquez forward if there is this kind of heap of noise in the background, is he knows if he wins that 9th world title, given the arm brake, given all the troubles on the Honda, given everything, his 7th world championship, his 9th world title in total, will probably be remembered and praised much more highly than Valentino's, which of course came in 2009. We are dangerously approaching 20 years since Valentino's last world championship. So that's going to be the kind of the key thing, I think, that will keep Marquez focused. It's no longer kind of he's sort of got the booze and this thing and that thing. He doesn't care about that anymore, because there is now firmly a goal in hand. And if you win the championship on Ducati, then all the people are like, well, he's only won it on a Honda. Well, he's won it on a Honda and on a Ducati, so what more do you want? And that's...
I almost think that the next 2 years, kind of thought about it over the winter, I'm like, if he wins one title, even if it's just whenever it's this year or next year, I mean, it'll go down as like the story's complete almost. And I almost think, he has this obsession with winning, but I think that he kind of last year just kind of has the obsession of just being a rider again. Like he loves that. He doesn't call it a job, and I think that's really interesting, isn't it, Pete? Because for years he kind of was always thinking about the next world title, the next however many wins, but now he loves to be in the moment almost, and I think he appreciates things so much more now. And he's 31, 32, and he's not that old at all, but it still feels like he's matured so much in 5 years since the arm break, hasn't he?
Yeah, and that's also, it's all part of the mental thing, isn't it? The fact that he knows he's nearer the end of his career than the start. Obviously, he's been given this second chance, and it's about making the most of it. And I think, coming back to your point about Marquez and the records and everything else, I think also let's not forget Pecco as well. Pecco, we hear, is underestimated. People say, Ducati always say, look, he doesn't get the credit he deserves.
Yep.
If he beats Marquez, we expect him to be fighting for the championship. But even if they weren't, that'll be a massive plus on his career, won't it?
That's right.
So it's really massive stakes for both of them in terms of their whole careers and how we look back. It'll be either Marc Marquez won his titles with Ducati, as you guys have just said, or Pecco stopped Marc Marquez on the same bike and proved that he can beat this guy who has dominated the sport since he came in 2013, barring the injury years. So a lot at stake, I think, for both of them, and that's why it's such a season to look forward to. I think let's just hope they both stay fit and healthy.
That's it. I was going to say that was the main thing. I want to get, as we know, this Ducati's best ever team. You said it, Lewis, in an article. I mean, we need them both to be on track at all times, because I think the sport needs something. I'm not liking it to Senna versus Prost here, but F1 have had those teammate tussles, and MotoGP's kind of lacked it for a lot of years now. I think if we get something that falls into that sort of mold, it could be really exciting, because the fact is, Marc Marquez, when he's completed a season, he's always beating his teammate. He always wins on the same machinery. If Pecco can turn this around and give Marquez a first loss in a team, that'd be pretty incredible, wouldn't it, for his credentials?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've obviously spoken a lot over the last 6-7 months, mark this, mark that. But we do, Pete's right, we have to kind of look into this thing of that it's a massive opportunity for Pecco Bagnaia. It's not necessarily make or break for his career, but it will definitely put it will put a caveat onto his World Championship so far if he doesn't then stand on his own 2 feet against Marc. Maybe not necessarily winning the championship, but if you can at least push Marquez to the end like he did with Martin these past couple of years, yeah, I think that would be enough to really legitimise Pecco's 2 world titles against first Fabio and then Jorge Martin, because, without discrediting that, we have been missing the grid's best guy at a competitive level for those years. Those, the likes of Mir and Quartararo and Pecco and Jorge Martin have all won those championships when Marc Marquez was not at the level he was pre-injury. So, there is that kind of overarching question for all of them, is what could they do in, a similar situation, equal machinery, or, as close to equal as you can get. And I think that's going to be a real key story for Pecco's season, and can he handle the pressure of that? Let's see. He had 8 DNFs or 8 non-scores last year against Jorge Martin. We have seen that Pecco is quite mistake prone in really high pressure situations. Remember the crash in Austin when he was leading a couple of years ago, when he had Alex Rins, I think, was right behind him, and Sepang last year in the sprint race when he was in that lead group and he crashed, and Marquez is a different prospect altogether. The pressure that he's going to put on him is going to be huge. So, yeah, this is going to be a real career kind of defining moment for Pecco Bagnaia. I don't think he necessarily has to win the championship, but at least prove that he could and can win it, and push Marquez all the way.
Yeah, I think so. And talking about all this just makes me want the season to start tomorrow, to be honest. We've got a few more launches. We've only got one this week. It's VR46 on Saturday. And then really, what is it? Is it KTM and stuff after? And then we're into testing for a bit, and then get through all that and a few more team launches. Then we get to Thailand for the first round of the season, which I can't wait for. It's crazy to think it's only next month when you look at the calendar in February at the end. But yeah, that's the nature of the beast today, MotoGP. It's the longest calendar, as they say. And yeah, I hope what we learned today, that the team the Ducati have set up, it delivers on track and off it, because I think fans will just love it so much. And even today, from the media reaction, I hope it's a good season. I hope we get 2 years of bit of everything with these two, Marquez and Bagnaia. But if you enjoyed the podcast today, like, subscribe, follow wherever you're listening to. If you're watching on YouTube, let us know what you think of the Ducati launch and the livery. I'd be interested to read some of those comments. And we'll be back next week for another podcast. Until then, take care.